Before we begin this morning, I should explain the position in relation to Mr. Stewart, whom I asked to return this morning. Having discussed certain issues with my assessors, I came to the view that it was not necessary to put any further questions to Mr. Stewart. And as Ms. McMenamin indicated that she did not wish to ask any questions under Rule 9.2, I cancelled Mr. Stewart's attendance this morning. And we're ready now to proceed to Constable Gary Wood. Would you take the oath, please? Raise your hand and say the words of the oath. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That I will tell the truth.
That I will tell the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Miss Graham.
Good morning, Constable Wood.
Morning.
You are Gary Wood.
Yes.
And what age are you?
46.
How many years service do you have?
14.
You own a police dog.
Well, the police own the dog. I work the police dog, yeah.
You're in the dog unit
Yes.
with Police Scotland. How long have you been working in the dog unit?
Coming up for about 9 years.
In May 2015, you were working in the dog unit.
Yes.
How long had you been in the unit by that stage, by May 2015?
Probably about a year or so.
You'll see in front of you that there is a blue folder, and
Yep.
if you would open that up, you should see inside that there's a hard copy of your inquiry statement.
Okay.
And please feel free at any time if you want to look at it or refer to it, take it out if it's easier. You'll have that in front of you the whole time I'm asking questions. When I go through this, it will come up on the screen in front of you, the computer screen, so people will be able to see it. But I will refer to maybe a paragraph. If there's other areas in your statement you want me to refer to, just let me know, and we can put it up on the screen. Thinking about paperwork, you do not have anything other than your inquiry statement in that folder. The PERC never came to ask you for a statement, did they?
No.
So there's nothing like that. In fact, as I understand it, the first time you were approached and asked for a statement was when the inquiry came to you.
Yes.
And let's look at that inquiry statement. It's SBPI 00108. And you'll see that coming up on the screen. And it's your statement taken on Monday the 28th of March this year.
Yes.
And if we look at the final page, we should see that it was signed on the 13th of May 2022.
Okay.
Now, on the version on the screen, your signature has been redacted, but from the hard copy, can you confirm that you had signed every page of your statement?
Yes.
Thank you. And the last paragraph of your statement, 83, says, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. And that is your understanding?
Yes.
Thank you. In addition to the folder in front of you, there should be an A3 sized spreadsheet. We call this the combined audio and video timeline. You have that?
Yes.
You may have seen a version of this previously. No. I don't know if you've watched any evidence. No. This, if we look at page 1, just to familiarise you with it, you'll see that on the left-hand column there are timings.
Okay.
And those are video timings, and there's also timings for audio timings.
Okay.
To the right of that, you'll see airwave transcription and airwave transcription. And you'll see that there are entries towards the bottom of page 1 where we can see that a controller in the ACR provided an Airwaves transmission in relation to diverting officers to Henry Road.
Okay.
As we go through your evidence, I'll probably refer you to parts of this where we have some of your Airwaves transmissions, and I'll just ask you some questions about that.
Okay.
But as we go through it, I'll tell you what page to look at and the timing. I'd like to begin by maybe looking at paragraph 6 of your inquiry statement and really just asking you about East Command. And can you tell us about the sort of structure in which you work in the dog unit?
Yeah, it was broken down when Police Scotland was first came into being. We used to work obviously the 8 legacy forces. That was taken to 3 command areas, which is the west, east and north. So our command area covers places like Central, Fife, Edinburgh, Borders, West Lothian, Mid Lothian, etc. And
So you're in East Command?
we're in East Command, yeah. So we have 3 kind of central hubs. We have one in Glenrothes, it covers Fife. We have one in central area, which is Larbert, and then we have one in Edinburgh, which also covers ex-Lothian Borders force area.
And do each of those command areas have a dog unit?
Yes. The dog unit is just the overarching banner for our whole dog unit, but each area has a kind of satellite area that they work from, but it's still under the same command area.
Where is the satellite area for East Command, where you
Well,
work?
there's 3. There's Fettes, where I work, in Edinburgh headquarters, and there's one in Glenrothes and one in Larbert. Those 3.
And you're in Edinburgh.
Yes.
How many dogs are in each of those satellite areas or work from those satellite areas?
Each shift there should be a maximum of 4 dogs that kind of work in areas. So we work 2 from Edinburgh, and we work 1 in Glenrothes and 1 in Larbert. So at any one time there should be 4 dogs covering that command area.
On any shift?
Yes, and that shift rotates obviously.
And those 4 dogs will cover effectively the whole of Scotland?
Not the whole of Scotland, the whole of the East Command area.
Well-
Glasgow again will have equivalent numbers for their side, and North Command would have equivalent for their side.
So how many dogs are working in East Command?
East Command in total,
Yes.
probably 20 dogs.
And
That's
in-
general purpose dogs, the kind of German Shepherd, the Malinois.
I'll
Because
ask
we
you
obviously
about
have
that.
specialist dogs who do other types of search and stuff. So, but for the general purpose type that people recognise as being police dogs, be about 20 covering the East Command area.
And is that the same for the West Command and the North
Yes,
Command?
it's generally the same. So you're probably talking, I'm not going to be exact, but say 60 dogs, kind of covering the whole of Scotland.
Thank you. But you've talked about general purpose dogs and then other types of dogs. Explain what a general purpose dog is.
A general purpose dog is a dog that is utilised to find human scent and to find people, or to deal with people that are violent or any kind of situation. So the general kind of nature of those dogs is we train them to find human scent. Then if there is someone that's basically ran away from something, or someone that's vulnerable, maybe a kind of suicidal person or someone with dementia, for example, we train the dogs to find the scent that is left by that person. The dog can follow that scent, obviously hopefully to find the source of that scent, the person that's kind of there at the end to be found. So the way we do that is the dogs are very, very amazing, for want of a better phrase, at finding scent, so much more powerful than our noses are. So there's 50,000 skin cells fall off the human body at any given second, and around that number.
That's
So-
a horrible image you've
Yeah,
just created.
it's certainly an image, but to look at a body through a special camera, you'll be able to see that the dead skin cells falling off the body. So what we do early in the day, early in the dog's development, we introduce that scent coupled with a kind of reward that the dog can associate with that scent through classical condition, etc. And the dog then learns, if I follow that scent, good things come. So if we follow that scent pattern and then obviously introduce other things into the mix, where the person's footprints into the ground can release moisture, all these different molecular changes in the footprint, coupled with the scent falling off the body, the dog then follows that, gets its reward. So that's how we can introduce the kind of tracking to the dogs further down the line. So that's how it's introduced. So we find dogs that are capable of doing that kind of work.
Fantastic. And what about the other types of dog you mentioned? You said there were general purpose dogs and others. What are they?
We have different types of specialism. Drugs and firearms were generally paired together because obviously the serious and organised crime nature, drugs and firearms kind of generally tend to go together. We then have separate specialism of the explosives dogs, who we do a lot of searching, like Hollywood, when the Queen comes into, or the King, they're going to come into residence. So we do loads of explosive searches for that kind of stuff, and we also do victim recoveries for cadaver dogs to find kind of bodies or residual component decomposition and that kind of work as well. So that's kind of the three main ones that we have.
So they've got special skills in relation to seeking out sort of unique smells.
Just a particular scent, yeah. So they're trained to find a particular scent. So cadaver dogs, obviously, for the decomposition, they're trained to find that. Explosives dogs, they work on all the major component scents of explosives, and drugs and firearms, we train them on all the different drug scents and the kind of firearm components, gun oil and all the firearms components of the guns and stuff like that. So yeah, each of those dogs, generally we use Labradors and Spaniels, and got obviously a very good hunting behaviour, and we train them to find those specific scents.
Thank you. But the general purpose dog, their role would include dealing with people who are violent,
That's
or
part of their job, yeah.
Part of their job, or who've maybe tried to escape,
Yeah.
or a missing person, you said,
Yeah.
or someone who's in crisis.
Yeah, well, it's a large majority of our work now. I'd say maybe 50-60% of our work is vulnerable people, or missing people that have kind of either having mental health breakdown or some kind of issue, or like I say, people with dementia, people that have maybe got lost and stuff like that. So it's a huge proportion of our work doing that type of stuff.
So the dogs, they're capable not just of dealing with violent people, but also very vulnerable people, maybe
Yes.
elderly people.
Yes.
So they've got a nice nature, if I can say that.
Nature, we obviously need to work with the nature of the dog that we have in front of us, but we have to assess the dog as having an ability to do the work first and foremost. So that the nature of the dog, is it biddable enough to be controlled? Is it safe? Is it efficient that we can work it in a safe manner? We have to assess all those things when we're doing the assessment of the dog, because if we have a dog that's uncontrollable and doesn't have a nature that's it's going to be controllable, then it's obviously not going to be safe when you're operationally working on the street. So we have to assess all those things when we're looking at dogs, yeah.
And when you're talking about controllable, is that controlled by the handler?
Yeah, yeah.
And is there always one individual police officer that works with one individual dog?
Yeah, yeah. In the police, we have our dog. We take our dogs home. They live in a kennel in the gardens, so they are individually given to a handler to manage and maintain. Military dogs, for example, they can pass from shift to shift because they have specific ways of working, specific command structures and stuff like that. They can move dogs from person to person, but with us in the different environments we take our dogs into, we work our dogs specifically to that individual handler.
And does that allow a bond to develop between you and the dog that you're handling?
Yeah, a bond's critical. If you've not got a bond with your dog, then you're not going to be able to work the dog in a safe, efficient and controlled manner. So yeah, the bond's critical.
Right. Do you, as a handler, have the same dog for their whole service?
Generally, I've had three. This one I've got just now is my third general purpose dog. The one I had at the time in 2015 was a dog that got rehandled because the handler had her before, got pregnant and went off duty. So I rehandled her to me at the time. So it depends. It depends if the health of the dog permits it to work for the 8 or 9 years that we're going to be able to work it, then
Is that how long they work
Yeah.
for the police?
they generally retire in around 9 years old, something like that.
How long do the dogs live? I mean, what's their lifespan?
Dogs, generally anywhere 10, 15 years, just the same as pets, no different to any pet animal.
And for 8 of those years, it'd be with the police force.
Yeah, 8 or 9 years.
Do they retire with a pension?
Unfortunately not, no.
No. And what happens to them once they've retired?
Generally the handlers keep them if they want to. If it's a practical solution, then if not, they can get rehomed to other people. My Ember, the dog I was working at the time, was rehomed to someone in through West who had another couple of German Shepherds who just loved German Shepherds. So she got hip dysplasia, so I had to rehome her at the time, and she probably wouldn't have been good for me to keep her because she was a very frantic dog at the back of a vehicle. So what I used to do was I used to try and avoid the vehicle as much as I could when I was off duty, so I wasn't putting that kind of on her. So she went to someone who didn't have a vehicle. She lived on the edge of a village, and she was able to just take her without putting that into her, because I didn't want her putting through that stress of what the lady would have went through to put her in a vehicle and stuff. So just each dog has their individual characteristics, the same as people do. So you've got to try and look at what's best for the dog and what's best for the handler at that given time.
And Ember wasn't particularly fond of being in the back of a police van.
No, she was a bit of a barker. But she
Is
had
that
she
how
had
you
that-
knew she was frantic?
Yeah, she had that trait. She just associated the back of the car with barking, so
All right.
it was just one of these things. But each dog has a different nature. They have a different different thought process. You know, dogs have their independent thought process. We have to instill in them a balance, what we're looking for through our training, to understand what different pictures they're seeing in front of them. Again, you talked about violence or vulnerability and stuff like that. We have to train those kind of elements into the dog so the dog can understand, right, okay, this person is showing threat behaviours or evasive behaviours where they're trying to escape, or the dog is actually coming across someone who's vulnerable, to then bark to indicate to the handler that the dog has found the person. So say someone's hiding in a woodland and it's a vulnerable person from a care home, and the person's lying. The dog is trained to basically go up, do a standoff, bark, bark, bark indication, so the handler can then come and join the dog. So we train different scenarios, so it gives the dog a different picture as to what they're facing, you know, and things like stick attacks, gun attacks. So the dog understands that this picture is this person is a threat coming towards either the handler, ourselves, or one of my colleagues. So the dogs, you have to train all these pictures into the dog's mind to understand, but they've got their own individual thought process as well, so you have to manage that.
Yeah. So you're teaching them scenarios, and as part of that, teaching them about body language and how
Yeah.
people act or react to different situations.
Yeah, dogs are very intuitive. They're not greatly intelligent in what we term in intelligence terms for human. All the science kind of points towards them being around 3 years old when it comes to human intelligence terms, but when it comes to body language, intuition of someone's feelings and stuff like that, dogs are very, very advanced compared to human beings in relation to how they read people and people's body language behaviour.
So how well are dogs able to assess whether someone's behaviour is violent or a person who's in distress? Can they distinguish between that type of behaviour?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about the training that a dog would have to go through to be deployed in the police service. How long is the training that you go through with a dog?
It's 13 weeks. The basic initial course is 13 weeks. Up to that point, generally the dogs will maybe start in around anywhere 14 to 18 months old. So by that point, they would have had a lot of initial training with either the breeder that they've came from, who will obviously be training working animals, or the person who's kind of asked to kind of puppy raise them will be given kind of specific tasks to look towards putting traits into the dog that's obviously going to be amenable to when you actually train them. But when it comes from the start of the training course to the end of the training course in Police Scotland, it's 13 weeks. And that's led by the Home Office. That's guidelines from them.
So that's across the UK.
Yeah.
So in relation to the age of a dog, they're quite mature when they start going through this police training course.
I wouldn't say mature. I'd say, let's say, anywhere from 14 to 18 months old. But you can take dogs that are slightly older than that or slightly younger, depending on what traits they're giving you at that time. If they're a confident dog, because what you've got to do is you've got to try and build up the dogs. It's not natural for a dog to bite someone, for example. So for the bite work, we train it in such a way where we have to teach the dog that when you're biting, it's done as part of the prey drive. A dog will either go into what's called the prey drive or the defensive drive. So if a dog is under attack, just like a human would be, then the dog will work on its instincts of protecting itself. But when we're doing the training, a lot of the work we do is in prey drive, where ultimately the person running away with the bite jacket on is the rabbit, in effect. So we train in that kind of setting, so the dog understands if a person's running away and we deploy the dog to go and detain that person, it's part of the game and what we're training the dog to do. It's not biting in that sense out of aggression, it's training as part of the prey drive in the game that we're actually building in its mind.
Let me just check I've got the right names for this. So there's a defensive drive.
Yeah.
And that's probably is what it sounds like. That's
Yeah.
defending maybe itself or you as a
Yeah.
handler.
Yeah.
Or another person,
Yeah.
a colleague or
Yeah.
such like.
Yeah.
And then prey drive, is that PREY,
Yeah.
prey
Yeah.
drive? And tell us more about this prey drive that is taught.
It's just a survival instinct that dogs have. It's survival to find food in the wild. So if you see a rabbit, you see a dog chasing a rabbit, that's the dog is working on its instinct to survive, to acquire food.
And you develop that drive
Yeah.
to suit the needs of the police service.
Yeah, yeah. But the dog also has to work in a defensive kind of frame of mind as well, because we are putting these dogs under a stress where the threat is going to come, and we have to have animals that actually understand and are able to overcome that threat, because we have people that attack officers or dogs, and the dog has to be capable of dealing with that threat. And if the dog doesn't have the courage to deal with that, obviously you don't want to put a dog through that kind of stress anyway. So those dogs wouldn't make it into the programme. There's only dogs that are able to actually deal with that stress of being under threat and then forcing that threat to go away. And that's what they're trained to do. And
So the temperament of the dog is
yeah,
selected and
It's
the
critical, yeah.
training is applied on top of that.
yes, it's critical. The nature, if that's the word that was used earlier, the kind of nature and the courage and how the dog copes with stresses is a major part of the selection process. Same as it is for human beings. It's no different. You know, if you had police officers who are incapable of dealing with those kinds of stresses that the work can bring, obviously it's probably not the job for them. It's just the way it is.
And is there a high level of dogs that simply fail the process and can't be deployed?
Yeah. There's definitely dogs that are kind of cut for the programme because they're not showing, or they're maybe showing characteristics that they're not enjoying the work that they're actually doing. So you don't want to put a dog through those kind of stresses because it's not going to enjoy the work, and the handler's not going to be ultimately have a tool that's able to actually do the job efficiently. So yeah, there is I couldn't give you a percentage of the ones that make it and not, but what we try and do is select dogs that come from a working background where maybe the parents of the dogs, or we're selecting breeders who have a history in working animals, who have the inherent DNA or fixed action patterns, we call them in the dog world, of those kind of traits that make them enjoy the work. You know, if you see if you see my dog working now, he loves everything he does, you know, so I enjoy working him because he enjoys everything he does, you know. So if I see stresses in my dog that he's not enjoying the work, it makes it much more difficult for me to deploy him, and it doesn't make it enjoyable for the dog. So it's you've got to be reading how the dog deals with stressful situations and then stimulate that in your training so that the dog is approximated to basically deal with that better the next time, because we all have a difficulty in dealing with a difficult situation the first time we come across it, and then the next time you maybe deal with something difficult like that, you're so much better equipped at dealing with that stressful situation.
Let me ask you about Ember, your dog in 2015. What breed was Ember?
She was a German Shepherd.
And for Ember, when she was in service, did she have something, not a uniform, but equipment on her that was marked or branded with Police Scotland?
Not with Police Scotland, but with police. She had a harness that she wore with a Velcro patch with police on it, yeah.
Right. So if you looked at her, you would have noticed that she was a police dog.
Yeah. That depends on what kind of situation. In a working environment, you mean?
Yeah. And how old was Ember in 2015?
Well, she was about 3 when I got her, so say 4.
4 years old. And you were her second handler.
Yeah.
By the time May 2015 came round, had you had an opportunity to build a bond with her and train with her?
Yeah.
And yes, were you comfortable with your skills and her skills at that time?
Yeah, I was probably relatively inexperienced at the time in the dog unit, but again, like everyone, you've got to build up your experience and your knowledge, and yeah. So, but if I was incapable of proving that I was safe, and so safety, efficiency, and control are our 3 mantras in the dog unit. That we have the safety and control element. The efficiency is a kind of one where you can tidy up the behaviours that the dog's showing, but as long as it's safe and the control aspect is there, you have to demonstrate that to actually be licensed with the dog. So I would never have been allowed to become operational with her if I hadn't demonstrated the safety and control. The efficiency element is just an ongoing process of sharpening the dog, making sure that the dog's trained in situations. The dog maybe shows you a behaviour when it's out, and then you go, right, okay, well that didn't work that time. You go back and you identify that in your training, and all your follow-up training is geared towards making the dog more efficient next time. But so the critical components though are the safety and control stuff, which is recalling a dog. If you send it to chase someone, for example, realise it's the wrong person, you have to demonstrate the recall of the dog. So the dog's in flight chasing this person, you give them the recall. If the dog doesn't come back, then you fail your recall control, so you wouldn't be licensed to go operational. So you have to demonstrate all these skills as part of the licensing process.
Did you have a licence
Yes.
with Ember in May 2015?
Yes.
So you were capable of sending her to apprehend somebody?
Yeah.
And if you thought it's the wrong person, you had the ability, even though she was in full flight, to recall her and bring her back before she even reached that person.
Yeah.
And let me ask about a situation where, for example, you have someone who's suffering a mental health crisis. So they're a vulnerable person, or they may be intoxicated with drink or drugs. You've told us that general purpose dogs are capable of doing that, dealing with people in mental health crises, but can you explain to the chair how it is that a dog can help in that situation?
First and foremost, the control element of an environment, placing a cordon on whilst if the person's displaying violence, then the visual deterrent of the dog, first and foremost, is very, very helpful, because it gives a focal point for a person to focus on. So for me, to verbally engage with that person, with the dog, I've got a protection element there, but I've also got the person's attention with the dog.
People notice your dog.
Yeah, people notice the dog. If the dog's barking and towards someone, it tends to get their attention. So it's a good focal point, and also a good deterrent for violence, because if you have that there, the person, I've found in my experience, is much, much less likely to fight with us, fight with my colleagues, fight with everybody else, because the person becomes compliant just through the visual deterrent of the dog even being present. is so much more powerful than lots and lots of cops kind of shouting and different, because it doesn't, there's several people kind of shouting in a situation, for example, when the dog arrives, it's a great focal point, the person just notices the dog, and we have a lot of kind of good engagements end that way, where the person just goes, right, okay, dog's here, just give up, and that was it.
Or do you find in your experience that people are maybe more apprehensive of a dog?
Very, yeah. And that's part of the training. That's why we teach the dog to speak and to bark. It's a visual deterrent indication.
Speak. Is the barking called speaking?
Yeah, we train the dog to speak, yeah. So it's a speak command, which indicates then the dog bark, 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 bark.
You can get your dog to bark on demand?
Yeah, that's part of the training, yeah.
And is that another way in which you get attention?
Yeah. It's the first sign, just like the same as speaking to an individual. You know, if you're trying to get their attention, if someone's drink, drugs, whatever, it's sometimes difficult to get their attention. So if you're incapable of garnering that attention from the person, I find the dogs are kind of very, very good at getting that person's attention, getting a focus, and actually getting compliance from them, so it's less likely to end up in a violent situation.
Can you tell us about some examples in your experience with the dogs, either Ember or now,
Yeah.
where you have had that good experience and achieved that good compliance?
Yeah.
If someone, say, is intoxicated, drink or drugs, or having a mental health crisis, can you give us any examples of a situation that you've dealt with
Yeah.
your dog?
There's one in Gorgie area. The guy was running about with an axe that was described as a red-handled axe, just off the main Gorgie street, so obviously a very busy place. So firearms weren't there at the time, so I'd basically arrived at the scene and found one of the police cars was empty, and a couple of officers had went into the kind of common stair that the guy had been seen. So I deployed the dog into the stairwell, and when I went up to the first floor, the guys were pointing towards a door which the guys believed to have kind of went into. So I had the dog there at the time, and the guy actually presented at the door, and he had weapons on him, and one of the officers was actually on the incline going up the stairs, so he was kind of almost, if the guy chased him up, he would have been kind of trapped. So by me having the dog there at that point, the guy ended up kind of putting his weapon on the floor. He had a couple of knives on his waistband as well after he'd been arrested, but he basically got on his knees, because I was basically using the dog as a use of force to say, down on your knees, just gaining that compliance from him, and then from that the guy was able to safely go down and handcuff him in a situation that could potentially have ended up in a very dangerous situation for especially the cop who was further up the stairs and trapped in the common stair.
Did you have the dog on a lead the
Yes.
whole time?
Yeah.
The dog never came off the lead?
No.
Never physically interacted with this person?
Physically interacted in the sense that she was barking at him, yeah.
Barking. And what about, was he intoxicated?
He was having a mental health crisis at the time. There was tons of weapons in his found in his, the axe that he had in the street was in his vestibule, and he had samurai swords and lots of other stuff. So he was just in mental health crisis. I don't know the follow up from that, whether he was intoxicated with alcohol or drugs, but he was certainly not by speaking to him in a kind of normal frame of mind. You know what I mean?
Can you think of any other examples where you've dealt with a situation with a dog, maybe in an open area, where the person was either in a mental health crisis or intoxicated, but not in a stairwell, more in a street or an open grass area?
I've dealt with numerous people that I've found in kind of wooded areas or areas where they've run off a stolen vehicle and kind of found them in a field and stuff like that. And again, just dealing with the compliance of forcing that person into a position of disadvantage so that my colleagues can approach them properly, can approach them safely, can deal with them in a way that's much safer than actually just going hands-on and having a struggle, and so putting them in that position of disadvantage either on the ground, and you're almost testing the compliance of that person before officers are approaching. So again, it's done in a much safer manner, because if I say to you, I've got my dog, can you get on the ground, get on your knees, put your hands at the back of your head. If a person's doing all those actions that you're asking to do, they're showing that they're kind of putting themselves in that disadvantage. So for them to then jump back up off their knees, you've got time that my colleagues are kind of protected. So if a colleague can approach from a position behind the suspect, so the person's not seen it, if he's still got his hands there, the person can get handcuffed in a safe manner because the fighting arc of the person's obviously in front. So if you can diminish that as much as possible with the control of the dog, and I find it's very, very effective at stopping people from fighting. I've found that numerous times. Like I couldn't go into like each different
numerous
aspect.
times.
Yeah.
And again,
Tons of times.
you're doing this. Is that you with the dog on the lead?
Yes.
So it's the visual deterrence and the barking,
Yes.
and that can ensure the compliance of the subject
It's very effective at ensuring
without the
compliance.
dog touching him,
Yes.
without any of your officers, other fellow officers touching him, or
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
And thank you. Can I ask you, in around 2015, how common was it then for you to be called out to an incident involving someone with a knife?
Every other day, I'd say.
So that's a very common occurrence for
Yeah.
you. And did you find that, what impact would you say having the dog at a knife incident had?
It's very effective. Back then, the firearms kind of situation was different. Obviously, the change in the terrorist threat and stuff like that. There's kind of more firearms officers now than probably there was back then. But so the dog as a deployment or a resource issue was always kind of there to protect the colleagues and to protect the members of the public. So we were always kind of deployed to those types of calls, and we still are. Now there's been kind of several instances of dogs being stabbed in different kind of force areas around the world because they've engaged in those kind of situations. So if I don't have to deploy my dog to go and detain a person in that situation, I'm very wary of doing so, because dogs are not knife proof, just the same as people are not knife proof. So we generally, if we've got an STO, which is the taser officer, I would always kind of support the taser officer in a situation where the taser officer can take control, and I'll be there as a contingency should the person look to make off. So we can change the roles in relation to that, given what we think is safest at that time.
We've heard that in 2015 officers didn't have tasers.
Yeah.
It would require an armed response
Yeah.
vehicle.
Yeah.
So if we can think about 2015, where there weren't generally the tasers available.
So yeah, I would have been shouted to the majority of those kind of calls,
Right.
to support the cops.
And is there an attitude that if it comes down to you or the dog, if someone's going to be stabbed, it would be the dog rather than you?
But it has to be an attitude. I think it's the dog is a working tool, and I love my dogs. There's nobody loves dogs more than me. But Ember at the time, she's a working animal. She's trained as a tool, and if it meant someone getting killed or her getting stabbed in the defence of that person, then obviously it's a tool that has to be used in that scenario. But that's a risk assessment I have to take at that time. But it sounds callous when you say it, but it's ultimately, they're a tool to be used to defend people in that situation. If a person's going to be killed, then I'd be deploying my dog, yeah.
And that's something you always have to be prepared for.
Yeah. But obviously I don't want to put my dog into a dangerous situation if I don't have to.
Tell us about, you've mentioned the word risk assessment. We've heard evidence about risk assessments.
Yeah.
Tell me about the sort of risk assessment you would be doing if you're attending a knife incident with your dog.
I'll just be looking for as much information as I can. Just gather the information and intelligence that you can to look at what your deployment options are for the dog, because you can't always rely on everything that's heard through the control room, so I generally tend to ask questions when I'm going to jobs, because maybe the controllers don't understand. When I get to a job and I deploy my dog, it's a high level use of force, so I have to justify that. So I want to know as much information as I possibly can, so I'll constantly kind of question bits of information and ask them to kind of follow up with further bits of information, because sometimes the information you get is not what you find when you get to the scene. I think through policing you learn that by experience. You know, you get a call regarding 50 people or 100 people fighting, and you turn up and there's 5 people fighting. So perception is kind of slightly different to what's actually been reported. So I'd just gather as much information and intelligence as I possibly can, then I'd assess that information, look at my kind of options for what I'm going to do. It's all part of the national decision making model that we get in officer safety training. Look at that, assess it, and then look at my powers, policies, think what can I do in this situation, what am I legally allowed to do, what is, and then once things happen and you take action, you review your situation, and then obviously just goes round spinning wheel again. So, but it sounds, when we get officer safety training, probably took me a couple of years to understand it really wholeheartedly what that really means, but we do it every single job we go to. You know, it's a very simple process of processing that information you're getting and asking those questions, because I need to be thinking about preclusion, for example. If I can preclude the use of using my empty hand techniques or my verbal chat because I'm suddenly being, somebody's shooting a gun at me. You know, if someone's shooting a gun at you, that level of violence is up there. We have to obviously meet that level of violence with our own. Like simply chatting to somebody that's shooting a gun at you is not going to work. So we are constantly looking at situations and assessing it in that frame of mind.
We've heard that officers should use the minimum force that they can, and we've heard about this concept of preclusion. And please tell me if I'm wrong, or that's about trying options.
Not just necessarily
or
trying
considering
options.
them, excluding them, and then moving on to other options, maybe more forceful options, as you either try and fail or exclude the lower level options.
You've got to look and see what situation is developing in front of you and think, well, is this thing going to work? Will this work? Will my baton work? Will verbal, open hand, giving yourself a bit of space, a show of force with a baton, for example, above the shoulder, or a low profile carry in a certain situation. So there's all these different techniques that we have to try and engage.
So you've got all the normal pieces of equipment, and you have a dog.
So a lot of time I'll go to jobs and I don't take the dog out, or even I'll maybe just open the boot of the dog car. I've had situations where people have approached me and I've had to kind of like almost take refuge at the back of the police van, just flip the tailgate of the van so the dog's there, still within the cage, but then I ask the dog to speak, and it'll basically stop a crowd of people actually coming towards me. Because then in a situation I've got 4 or 5 people coming towards me at the back of the vehicle, I'll either have to just, get out there, because I could take my dog, bite one, then I've got 4 other people to deal with, so I've got to assess that threat and go, is it best to deploy the dog here, is it not? You've always kind of assess it.
Even the dog in a cage in a van is a sufficient visual deterrence at times to prevent matters escalating.
We do that, things like football, for example. You've got football games where there's maybe opposing fans and you'll have the dogs present. Again, it's just a visual deterrent to say, right, okay, there's a deployment of dogs here. People are less inclined to then go down the line of committing violence. It's just a deterrent.
I'm interested in where the dog or the use of the dog would fit in terms of the preclusion that you've talked about. We've heard about tactical communications with officers, and we've heard about restraint or strikes with batons or such like. So we've heard about levels of force, and we've heard about verbal communication. Where in the spectrum of the use of force would you describe the use of a dog? You've obviously talked about just the visual presence.
It's quite high up there. I mean, you've got your profiled offender behaviour, how you assess how that person's behaving at that given time, and then you've got to match that profiled offender behaviour with your how high up that ladder the use of force you're going to use to actually contain
I'd like to
that
do
threat.
that with you. I'd like to
Right.
look through those
No,
with
it
you.
is straight
You're
off the top of the head.
anticipating my questions.
Okay.
Can we look, please, at the use of force SOP? Do we have that? That's PS 10933. Or we could have the manual, 2013 manual, which would be PS 11538A. Either of those would be. If you just give us a moment, we'll see it on the screen. Is this the use of force? This is the use of force standard operating procedure, which was in force in May 2015.
Okay.
So if we could look at that, and if we could look at 4.6 and 4.7. So the 4.6 should be the profiled offender behaviour. Here, profiled offender behaviour. This term encompasses the actions and behaviour of the subject and comprise of the warning and danger signs they exhibit, coupled with impact factors. Profiling a person's behaviour may assist in determining an officer's reasonable response. Profiled offender behaviour can be subcategorised. So you'll see there 462 level 1 is compliance. So this is the subject who is at level 1 and it's compliance, and it says most people dealt with are reasonable and will comply with any lawful instruction. This compliance may be verbal or it may be active compliance, such as stopping an action when told. And do you understand that?
Yeah.
That description? Tell me, in terms of the response with the dog, what would, if someone is demonstrating level 1 compliance, what could you do with your dog? Or what would you need to do, if anything?
Nothing. If the person's there, probably even driving up in the dog van and it says police dogs on the side of the van is enough, and I'll just start chatting to the person. I don't need to engage the dog at that point. If the person's showing compliance, then
Nothing.
no.
Level 2, verbal resistance and or gestures. This includes shouting, swearing, verbal challenges to requests and or instructions given. It normally includes non-verbal gestures and posturing, body language, and can consist of warning and danger signs of potential attack. Do you recognise that level 2?
Yeah.
What could you do? How could your dog help with a subject who's demonstrating level 2 behaviour?
Again, just the presence of being there. Again, I wouldn't generally be getting my dog out in a situation where someone's just showing that kind of level 2 verbal resistance, someone being a bit mouthy or whatever. I'm there as a trained cop. I'm a police officer as well. I'm not just a dog handler. It's like a dog handler's a specialism, but I've got 14 years in the police, so speaking to that person, trying to get them to kind of stop their behaviour, and sometimes they'll maybe not be compliant at the start, but your explanation to them to tell them what's going to happen should they refrain from their behaviour, it's obviously going to be more powerful than anything. So that, coupled with, I also have other, like the sign of me in my uniform with all the equipment it's on that, again, as a visual deterrent, not just the dog in the van. Me as a police officer is a visual deterrent to that person to kind of change that behaviour.
What if the person, it appears to you anyway at that stage, what if that person appears intoxicated or as if they may be having a mental health crisis? How could the dog help with that, with a subject who's displaying that type of level 2 behaviour in those circumstances?
Like I said earlier, the presence of the dog or even the dog van could focus that person's attention towards you. So you could use that to your advantage to try and engage the person.
And by engaging, do you mean trying to communicate with them?
Yeah.
Is there a restriction on time that you can use that? No.
No.
Okay. And what if the person has or is suspected of having, maybe not visible to you, but suspected of having a knife, but appears to be displaying level 2 behaviour?
Well,
How can the dog help with that situation?
Again, containing the area, try and, again, be a visual contact point for the person and try and contain and be support for the officers that are present and be there as a kind of contingency should things escalate to a level where the threat needs to be dealt with. So.
What distance do you have to be from a person so that they can see the dog, hear the dog, maybe have the full impact of that visual deterrence?
You have to be aware of what's called a person's fighting arc. So if you're within striking range of that person, or that person can close you down, obviously certain parts of our kit, like the incapacitant spray that we use, works at an optimal level from set distances. But when it comes to being the dog and being close in, I'd prefer to get as much distance as I possibly can while still being effective at communicating with the person, because that safety gap will give you more decision time to think about your options, your preclusion, what am I going to use here if someone's kind of chasing me down, and it gives you an escape route to move by being further away. The closer you are to a person, obviously the higher risk that you're at, so I'm not going to give you a specific distance for it, but the more distance you can have while still being effective at communicating is more optimal.
Can we look at passive resistance, level 3? This is a typical tactic used, but not exclusively, by demonstrators. It is best described as non-active conduct with no compliance to lawful instruction. Do you recognise that description?
Yeah.
Again, if somebody is demonstrating level 3 passive resistance, how can the dog help in relation to that?
It's not much a change for the one before, to be honest, because the passive resistance, like it says there about demonstrators, kind of predominantly, but sometimes we get subjects that are maybe just like hiding their hands under their body, just don't want to be arrested, but they're just staying rigid. So I don't think the dog in that situation is really that effective, to be honest, because if they're in that frame of mind where they're just still, again, the presence might change their behaviour, but if someone's kind of showing that passive resistance, I don't think the dog's really that beneficial in that. But there may come a time that changes, and I come across an instant where it maybe is effective. But
if the person is suffering from a mental health crisis or intoxicated with drink or drugs, but demonstrating level 3, does that alter what you've just said about the benefit of having the dog?
No, it's just the same as the one before. Just again, trying to get focus. It might be beneficial by being there. Sometimes I've found speaking to people, especially people maybe that are under the influence of drugs or whatever, but they like dogs and they have dogs. Sometimes even being there, people kind of talk to us like we're almost not police officers. So it's sometimes really effective at de-escalating a situation because of what kind of doggy you got, and you're able to get a little bit more compliance because you've got a common theme that you can speak to about. So, and
many people in this country like dogs.
Yeah. So there's a kind of a respect thing there that they forget you're a police officer for a period of time. I've found that lots.
And what if in that situation where the subject's demonstrating level 3 behaviour, but they are suspected of having a knife? Would that alter what you've just said?
Not greatly. Again, just putting that containment on, just getting the officers further back, and maybe having the dog in front of the officers in a way where we're trying to do the containment of the subject that's there in a kind of safe manner as possible, rather than the officers being there and then the dog being behind. So if the threat of the knife is there, I think it does escalate up to a point where I'd have closer access to my dog for sure, either from the back of the vehicle or potentially on a lead, to say this threat may escalate very, very quickly and I have to react in a quicker manner. So yeah, I'd probably be looking at that. But if the dog is going to compound the situation, possibly, then you could again change it, look at your powers and policies and think, okay, I'll stick the dog away because it's actually making things a little bit worse. So when we go to contain and negotiate situations, sometimes an individual officer, for some reason, the subject that's there will have a particular issue with that person. So we'll take them out the firing line and then have another person trying to negotiate with them to have that verbal communication be more effective.
If you have concerns about a situation escalating, you've said that you would have your dog on the lead. Is that
no,
when the
not
dog's...
all the time, but sometimes it's an option, because like the guy that was in that stairwell that I told you about on the landing, again, was reported he had this axe, so the reason I deployed the dog was to protect the officers and to deal with the threat that may escalate, because things happen so quickly. It's to have access to your dog is really critical, really important, because if someone starts chasing a cop, or someone starts chasing a member of the public and they produce that weapon. So again, you're dealing with the information and intelligence that you've got at that given time. If someone's telling me this guy's got a knife, he's sitting there on the ground, but he's not complying with what you're being said. He's already kind of starting to show the sign that he's not being compliant, right? Okay, so where is this going to go? Unless we can talk him down into compliance, it's going to go potentially further up that chain, and then move on to the active resistance that you're going to go into next. So we have to be ready and prepared for that active resistance coming.
So you'll try to talk him down,
yeah,
but you'll have the dog close in
yeah,
case things escalate.
Yeah.
And then let's look at level 4. This is active resistance. This is more of a physical form of resistance, in that the subject is actively doing something to prevent or obstruct an officer from carrying out their duty. This type of resistance, although physical by nature, falls short of an assault upon another. It can include holding onto an object or person either physically or mechanically, struggling to break free from an officer's grasp, or trying to dispose of evidence. So again, if a subject is demonstrating level 4 behaviour, how can a dog assist?
If someone's trying to break free from an officer's grasp, again, they're trying to evade capture, the deployment of the dog may have to come further down that line if he continues to break free, but depending on what crime is taking place. If it's a shoplifter trying to break free from a cop and he runs away, I wouldn't be deploying the dog in that situation. But if it's someone who's maybe stabbed someone, or someone who's committed a serious assault or something like that, and the person breaks free from the officer's grasp and runs away, then I have to be ready to try and detain that person if required. But so it really will depend on the type of crime that's taking place for how I would react with a dog in that situation. It's too wide a...
It's too wide a...
Yeah.
So it could be that you don't use the dog,
yeah,
or it could be that you send the dog to apprehend the person.
If they break free, yeah.
So there's quite a range there of possible options with
Massive
the dog.
range, yeah.
And if the person is intoxicated or suffering from a mental health crisis, would that alter any of those options?
Again, depends on the vulnerability that is being described. If the person is suicidal, for example, and he wants to run away to harm himself, and he's running towards a bridge or something like that, me deploying the dog to bite that person rather than the person jumping off the full bridge, for example, that's a better option, because the person may get injuries to his arm with the dog detaining him, but it's going to save him from taking his own life. So that's obviously going to the extremes of the matter, but that's the kind of example that I can think of just now.
So again, you've got the whole range of options open to you. It would depend on the circumstances.
Yeah.
And that would include a situation where, and you've mentioned the knife scenario. Can we look at level 5? This is assaultive resistance. This is when there is a deliberate intention by another to cause a physical effect upon a person, either directly or by indirect means. Assault by menaces. It can be caused by an individual or by a group of people acting together. I'm interested in an individual who may be demonstrating level 5 behaviour. Tell us how your dog could assist in that situation.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same as the last answer. I know I'm kind of going back into the same thing,
it's
but
very helpful to have
assault
the
of
details.
resistance can mean, someone
Say a punch.
someone's intoxicated, and anytime a cop goes near them, they're trying to punch out at the person or something like that, to someone being on top of someone and try to force a brick on their head or something like that.
Can your
it's
dog help?
It's so wide ranging. I mean, if someone is going to a level where they're going to seriously injure my colleague or seriously injure a member of the public, then the dog could help by apprehending that person, yeah.
So if someone punches a police officer, the dog could help apprehend them?
Depending. Again, just on the circumstances to that, what other impact factors are there, what's
What might
happened prior to
stop-
this.
What might stop the dog being able to apprehend a person who's punched an officer?
Well, again, am I capable of apprehending the person? Is there other officers there that are able to apprehend the person? Is the officer sustained injuries, or has he got a punch to the head and it caused any injury and stuff like that? So one specific punch to another punch that could potentially kill someone, someone's kind of fallen back and hit their head off the pavement and they've got really serious injuries. My reaction would obviously depend on what's in front of me at that time. So it's very difficult to say how I would deploy the dog in any situation until I see that picture in front of me, because it's so important that I take on board everything that's in front of me, and then that's how I'm able to do, well, preclusion, I did this and my justification for this was because of these factors. But to simply go on the bans and then saying, I would do this with my dog or do that, it doesn't really work like that. It's like I have to take everything in totality and say, this is why I would deploy my dog in this situation, because what we do is a bite debrief after it. If I've deployed my dog to bite someone, I have to do all these preclusion justification stuff to actually explain why. And some people would look at it and go, why did you deploy your dog in that scenario?
Yeah.
You have to actually say, well, this is how I was feeling at the time, this is the picture that I saw before me, and this is why I reacted in the way I did.
Well, I'm going to ask you about level 6 first, and then I'll ask you about some circumstances for your specific comment.
Okay.
So level 6 is serious aggravated assaultive resistance, the highest level of resistance encountered, which generally involves the intended use of weapons as part of the attack, where the perceived threat is that of serious injury or is life-threatening. It can also include situations without the presence of weapons, where the perceived threat is that of serious injury or is life-threatening. The above provides a rising scale of resistance. An offender may display a combination of these types of behaviour and may start at any level. And we've heard that they're not clearly defined categories and things can be blurred between them.
Yeah.
So again, if a subject is demonstrating level 6 behaviour, how can a dog assist with that? Or is there any difference to what you've already told
No,
us?
just
really?
well, that level, obviously the dog being there used as a use of force is there to suppress that threat. So if we train the dogs to bite the upper arm area, then the dog is trained to basically hold on to that individual through pain compliance to basically suppress that threat so we can arrest that person in a safe manner. Then obviously the dog is released once that person is contained and safe.
So at this stage, a dog, you could instruct or command your dog to bite the person
Yeah,
as a use of force
yeah,
to prevent this subject demonstrating level 6 behaviour.
yeah.
And you mentioned the arm. Is it always the arm that they bite?
We train them to predominantly take the upper arms, yeah. But a dog will, given the circumstances, depending on how they're and what drive they're biting a situation, they will take a part of the body that is obviously kind of available to them at the time. But we train them as the standard to basically take the upper arm area.
So if a subject is demonstrating the highest level of behaviour, what is the worst thing that to them that the dog is going to do?
You bite them in the arm and just make them submit.
And so it's that pain
Yeah.
control.
It's pain compliance to submit or suppress the threat.
But they're not trained to go beyond that
No.
level of biting or
No.
attack.
You want a dog to basically go, bite the arm, clamp, and then the person suppresses, and then they can be arrested in a safe manner, and then the dog is released.
If the person doesn't comply with the dog or react to the pain and the clamping of the dog on its arm,
Yeah.
will the dog go further and cause further damage to the person?
Potentially. End of the day, the dog is then in a situation where it's fighting for its life, and a dog would then flip into the defensive kind of way of biting, where, like you and I would, you'll defend yourself. A dog will defend itself, but we train them to take that arm, and you don't want a dog that kind of then takes off and then reattaches to another point of the body. It may happen in middle bites, but if the dog's not confident and strong, that's generally what happens. But you've got a confident, strong dog, they will clamp harder and basically put on more pressure to submit that threat, just like they would in the wild. So you can't...
So they grip on.
Yeah, you train the grip so that the dog pushes into the grip, pushes in and holds. That's the kind of dog you want, that's able to overcome that threat. I don't know, it's not a nice thing to talk about. It's like, probably the public don't want to, but that's why the dogs are there. We're there to try and deal with the threat that's in front of us. And like I say, I would only deploy my dog in a situation like that if it's very, very necessary and lives are on the line. But that's what the dog there is, as a tool to basically stop that threat being towards another person or another colleague.
Was Ember a strong and competent dog?
She was, yeah. She had her idiosyncrasies, but she was
Her barking
confident.
in the
Yeah,
back
she
of
was
the van.
yeah, she had her little peccadillos, I think, which we've all got. But again, she was confident when she was working. Yeah.
Was she competent and strong in relation, if you had given her an instruction to bite somebody, would she have complied with that instruction?
Yeah.
And would Ember have been, you've talked earlier about the ability to recall a dog, even if it's in full flow. If you had been with Ember and she was clamped onto somebody's arm, but you instructed her to release,
Yeah.
would she have complied with that instruction?
That's part of the licence and the safety and efficiency. If you're not capable of getting your dog off or recalling it from, I mean, the recall itself is so critical to what we do, because ultimately you need the dog to understand that no matter what situation it's in, the dog responds to the handler. So if you've got a dog ultimately that disobeys a recall, for example, and then goes and bites someone when you've actually shouted it back, it's obviously a failure of safety and control. So that person's licence would then be withdrawn. They potentially get an action plan to work through those kind of scenarios in a situation where they go and do the same exercise over and over to get the dog to understand, no, you come back. But there might be a time when, if a dog fails a recall, the dog would have to get kind of taken out the programme and be rehomed, because it's not a dog that's suitable. If a dog's not listening to you, then it's a potential danger to members of the public. So,
Thank you. Can I ask you about, I said that I would, once we'd gone through the levels, I would ask you about a particular scenario. A scenario where officers have arrived, and I want to talk about the ways in which you could have used your dog in this situation. So a subject is demonstrating initially level 1 or level 2 behaviour. They then refuse to or fail to comply, I should say, with verbal commands. And their behaviour starts to move up the levels that we've seen. They are sprayed, potentially up to 6 times with CS and Pava spray. That they then punch a police officer. So again, going up the levels of behaviour. And I'm interested in, if we just take that as one scenario, how you with your dog could assist officers who were at the scene.
it sounds like a messy scene. So when I arrived, again, given what you've given me, I probably would have deployed the dog on lead at that point to be a contingency should things escalate further. But again, it's easy me saying that now in hindsight. It's just the situation that unfolded and the information on that morning that we were kind of given over the radio, which you'll probably go on to. Then the information and intelligence picture that we're being given is that there's a potential threat there. So if that threat is then met by non-compliance, escalation in behaviours, all that kind of stuff, then that would be taken into consideration when I first arrived. But to merely say I would do this or do that, it's difficult. But certainly with what you've given me and the information and intelligence picture that I've got, I would be very, very close to my dog and looking at what would have came across should I have arrived at the scene and think, right, okay, am I going to take the dog into this situation and it's going to potentially make it messier? So I've got to think about that sometimes as well. If I take a dog into a situation where there's lots and lots of stuff already involved and lots of people, it's potentially going to make things messier. There potentially could get an officer could get bitten as part of that melee as well. So I've got to think of the safety of everyone that's there. So maybe in that situation I would have arrived and went, oh, actually I need to just be an extra hand, or maybe take control of certain things as a kind of more experienced officer or whatever. I don't know. I never got to the scene, so I can't actually say what I would have done.
If you are the first person there, or officers are there but they've waited for you, you're basically the first person sent in.
I would have taken the lead, probably as a. And generally colleagues will look at me to take that lead as the kind of dog person, or I'll try and cajole them if I've maybe met round the corner and say, right, okay, when I get there I'm going to try and engage them with the dog and try and get some verbal communications done as a focal point.
So you're saying meet round the corner, say they're meeting at a rendezvous point.
If that's happened,
and you're there, or they're not maybe necessarily round the corner but they're in the vicinity but sitting there waiting, and they've waited for you, you would take the lead on that with the dog?
I generally tend to, yeah.
And does that mean you'd have the dog on the lead, out the van on the lead, and you'd go and approach the subject? Again,
potentially, depending how many officers are there, depending how many members of the public are there, if there's anybody needing protected, if that person, again, the kind of area that was in the middle of a field where there's no members of the public, and we can contain that whole field, stick a cordon around the whole field, give them that space in the middle, get a megaphone, speak to them from a distance, do all these things to try and minimise the risk to the officers, minimise the members of the public. So I can't say what I would have done in that situation, because
you weren't there.
I can't look at the layout, I can't see the escape routes for the officers that are there, I can't see the potential inherent dangers of any. Again, it could be children running about, there could be other dogs that are there. So you're assessing every single thing of the layout of what you're seeing in front of you and going, dog's going to work here or a dog's not going to work here.
But all of the options that you've described to me in response to looking at the different types of behaviour and your earlier evidence, they are always open to you depending on the particular circumstances that you're faced with.
Yeah.
And you carry out your risk assessment in terms of the national decision-making model.
Yeah.
And you would tailor your response with the dog depending on the circumstances as you saw them at any given time.
Yeah, and there's nothing worse than being in a situation where you don't have access to your dog, for example. I got assaulted a while ago down at the Cramond waterfront because I was out looking for a missing person, for example. There was loads of joggers, loads of walkers, stuff like that. The other dog handler was searching around the kind of home area for this gentleman who went missing, and I just decided to go and walk the waterfront. So I didn't take the dog with me because there was too many people, too many runners and dog walkers and stuff. So I just walked the waterfront. At the end of the waterfront, happens to come across a gentleman who then decides he wants to go fighting with the police because of the uniform I had on. Not even the person I was looking for. So suddenly I'm away from my vehicle, no tools, individual officer, so I end up having to engage with this guy, and it just turns into a bit of stramash. So you learn pretty quickly, I need to be close to my tool, my dog, that I have the ability to deploy that, because at the end of the day that's what I'm there for. I'm there as a specialist officer, so without me having a dog and the ability to deploy that dog quickly, it doesn't really help having that specialism there. But sometimes it will dictate with, like you say, the level of compliance. I don't need to get the dog out because I'm a police officer first and foremost, and then I'm a police officer with a tool. So same as a kind of firearms officer going to a job, not having his guns with him. It's just, it makes sense that in most situations that escalate, and things do escalate really, really quickly, and it's very difficult again in hindsight to look over these things. I understand that that's just part of the process of what we're going through here, but it's another thing to actually be in that situation where someone goes from level 1 straight up to that top level without any kind of warning whatsoever, and that reaction time it takes for someone to process that information and until you've had several kind of times where people have assaulted you and went through that process, your body, your mind is able to adapt much more quickly to actually react to it, rather than obviously people sometimes freeze because they've never been in that situation before. And you can try and role play all those situations, but it's very, very difficult until you're actually faced with that threat to actually fluently allow your brain to think, okay, what are these, what's my contingencies, what's my policies, and getting that mindset. You know, it takes time to learn and get that experience in the job.
And everyone's experience is different.
Yeah.
And for you, one of your most important pieces of equipment or a tool is your dog.
Yeah.
And I can see that you feel that having your dog is an important part of your work and your ability to do your job properly.
It's massive, yeah.
Yeah. Can we look please at the combined audio and visual timeline? That's the spreadsheet that you have in front of you.
Okay.
And can I ask you, do you have a, we maybe won't need it. If there's yes, we'll put the combined audio and visual timeline on the screen, please. Do you have any other paperwork in front of you, Mr. Wood?
Yeah, no.
That's fine.
Just the two things you described.
Actually, what I'd like to start with is the storm log. It might be better to start there. We heard some evidence yesterday about the storm log, and I'm interested in PS 00232. So you don't have a copy of this in front of you, but it's only 2 bits I want to ask you about. Oh yes, there may actually be a hard copy we can provide you with. So it's PS 00232.
Thank you.
And it's at the top left-hand corner, you'll see it says 3/5/2015, 7:15.
Yeah.
And it's now on the screen as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And we've heard that this is a storm log, comes up on the screen in the ACR.
Okay.
And I just want to ask you about something on page 2. You'll see in the middle column on the right-hand side that there are timings in a column. Would you look please at 7:18 and 18 seconds?
Yep.
And it's on the screen. And it says SD10 attending.
Yeah.
We've heard that was a dog unit.
Yeah, Sierra Delta, specialist dogs.
It's specialist dogs.
Well, I assume that's what it's from, but I've always assumed it's specialist dogs.
Right.
How they've come up with the numbers, because they change every few years. They kind of seem to change these call signs and stuff. But yeah, Sierra Delta 10.
And then slightly further down that page, you'll see another reference that says SD18. If we can go down to 7:21 and 25 seconds.
Yeah.
So it says SD18 attending from Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And were you SD18?
I was Sierra Delta 18, yeah.
18,
so
sorry.
Sierra Delta 10 is probably a typo, I would think, but Sierra Delta 18, that's kind of always the call sign I generally used, yeah. Sierra Delta 10 was a call sign from Central, I think. So, yeah, it would have been me being 18.
Right. So you were 18 that day?
Yeah.
And you were attending from Edinburgh?
Yeah.
Now, we've heard that, keep those timings in mind, but let's look at the combined audio and visual timeline. We've also heard evidence in relation, let's look at page 2 of the spreadsheet. And just to give you some context, you'll see that at 7:17 and 23 seconds, you'll see an entry relating to Acting Police Sergeant Maxwell.
APS
And he
maximum.
requests all units an ARV and a dog as well, please. Do you see that?
Yeah, I see that.
And then further down at 7:19:12, you'll
Yeah.
see an entry by Maxwell again saying, is there an update from ARV or dogs unit over? And then Con 1, who we've heard was a Mr. Masterton, at 7:19 and 17 seconds says, I believe a dog unit is en route.
Okay.
And we heard yesterday that SD10 by that time was attending.
Yeah.
And you've told us you were attending from 7:21:25. Now we've heard some evidence that the airwaves transmissions are audible to officers on their radios,
Yeah.
and that's audible to ACR, to the inspector in Kirkcaldy Police Office, but also to the officers en route to Hayfield Road.
Yeah.
And was that airwaves transmission audible to you also?
It would have been, yeah. I've got a vehicle handset that would be on P-Scott in top. I don't know if it was the same back then, but a roaming channel, we call it, for specialist services. And then I would have switched my personal radio onto the local channel. So I was kind of listening to both.
Into the Kirkcaldy, the events in Kirkcaldy
Yeah.
that
At some
day.
point I would have switched my radio onto the Kirkcaldy channel. Yeah.
And we heard yesterday that as well as the airwaves transmissions, that from ACR there is communication going on in the background. So between Sergeant Maxwell asking for a dog and then being told by the controller in ACR that there was a dog en route, there would have been some communication in the background, not that we can hear on the airwaves transmission, but someone such as another controller at ACR contacting the dog unit people.
Okay.
So is that how you got involved with these events?
It would have been the roaming channel, shout up for the specialist resource. So yeah, I just been shouted on the roaming channel, and then I would have switched my normal radio onto the Kirkcaldy channel.
And is that shout out from the ACR?
Yeah.
So they make an open request
Yeah.
to
Then
dogs,
just shout up something like any dog handler able to attend a call in Kirkcaldy.
and you responded to that?
Yeah.
And having responded to it at that time, were you still in Edinburgh
Yeah.
at Fetties?
I just started, yeah, because it was 7 o'clock start.
It was
quite quickly.
7:18, 7:21 in the morning
Yeah.
on the Sunday, the 3rd of May. Tell us, once you received that communication from ACR, what did you do?
Stuck the Blues and Twos on and started driving over towards Kirkcaldy.
That's the flashing lights,
Yeah.
the sirens.
Yeah, I just started attending from Edinburgh as quickly as I could.
Right. How long did it take you to get the dog into the van?
The dog was probably already in the van at that point. I normally for day shifts I'll get there maybe at about 6:30, so I'll get the dog a pee, everything like that, get the dog in the van, get my uniform on, get ready so that I'm actually starting at 7 o'clock. So the dog would have been in the van at that point, so it'd been a case of me just jumping in the van and going.
What type of van was it?
I'm not 100% sure, maybe either a Ford Cougar or maybe a Connect van, maybe
Okay.
a Ford Transit Connect.
Can we look at your inquiry statement for a moment, please? And if we could start with paragraph 38. And you'll see this on the screen. And you say here, I basically loaded the dog up in the van and just left from Edinburgh. I was just hearing the radio communications from the transcript as I was driving over. So I think I got probably over to just past the Forth Road Bridge at the time when everything developed and happened as it did. So at that point I got stood down just prior to actually going off and doing what needed to be done at the locus. So I was aware of everything that was going on from the radio, but I didn't have a huge involvement in anything that went on at the scene. The drive from Edinburgh to Kirkcaldy would probably take me about 13 or 14 minutes with lights and sirens. Anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes depending on congestion. On an early Sunday morning, I would expect empty roads and nothing to slow me down. And you've given an estimate there in paragraph 39 of anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes to get from Edinburgh to Kirkcaldy.
Yeah.
How realistic was that estimate?
I don't know. I'd have to look at Google Maps, to be honest. I don't know. Yeah, if it's clear roads, you're straight along Queensferry Road, straight past Barnton, up onto the Forth Road Bridge, and you're on the A90 and 92, so it's pretty much straight roads all the way. So yeah, I'd say 15 minutes is accurate enough.
What was the traffic like that Sunday morning at
I can't
20
remember,
past
but
7?
I can imagine it would have been quiet because it's a Sunday morning, generally is. But
What speed were you doing when you've got the blue lights and the sirens on?
at what specific point?
As you were travelling to Kirkcaldy?
Well, it depends the speed of the actual road that I was on.
Did you comply with the speed limits on the road, or do you go faster when you're doing...
I'd like to think so, but I couldn't give you an exact, to be honest.
I'm not asking you to confess to speeding. So it's been... One of our witnesses suggested some surprise that the idea you could be there in 10 to 15 minutes. And I just wondered how confident you were about that estimate.
I honestly don't know. Unless I went out and drove it under those conditions again, I'm not sure. But yeah, 15 minutes for me, if you're going in the A90, it's a 70-mile limit, so you can go up to 90 miles an hour on the 90 and 92. So it's I think 15 minutes would be a doable enough time, given kind of quiet road conditions. But again, I could be wrong.
All right, thank you.
That was just this kind of stuff there was obviously a chat on Teams with a solicitor, and it was just basically that. It was a chat, just so the accuracy of that maybe, but I don't think it'd change it much, to be honest.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand. So when you gave your inquiry statement to the inquiry team, you did it over Teams?
It was over
online.
Teams, yeah.
Right. Can I ask you, when you, at paragraph 38, you mention you just, I got probably over to just past the Forth Road Bridge at the time when everything developed and happened. So at that point I got stood down. Tell us what sort of time you took to get to the Forth Road, getting just past the Forth Road Bridge.
I don't know, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, I don't know.
All right, thank you.
Again, it's just all kind of guesstimate stuff I
Yeah.
just have to normally give you.
But are these your best estimates,
Yeah,
based on your recollection?
based on my, I don't know, knowledge, experience, but again, I've never timed those kind of runs. You know, it's difficult to say exactly.
Have you had to go to Kirkcaldy
Yeah.
on other occasions?
Yeah. Again, I don't time these things, so unless I actually went out with the mindset of timing where I got to and stuff like that, it's difficult to say.
All right, thank you. Can we go back to the combined audio and video timeline, the spreadsheet, please? And we were looking at page 2. You'll see that we finished at 7:19:17 with the controller at the ACR believing a dog unit was en route, and I'd like to move on to your first sort of contact on the Airwaves transmission, which I think is page 6. Someone will tell me if I'm wrong, but at the bottom of page 6. And you will see that you do make a transmission at 7:24:06. It's inaudible 118 to control. I think you said your number was 18.
Yeah, Sierra Delta 18. Yeah.
SD18. And then the controller responds, and then if we turn over to page 7, And you'll see it's 7:24:11.
Yeah.
It says, Gary Wood, yeah, I'm en route from Edinburgh. I take this as the same male with the knife. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember where you were when you made that transmission? No. And then if we move on to page 8, you'll see at 7:26:20, which is at the top, you see Sierra Delta 18. We don't have a note of what you said. And then on page 9,
Probably saying inaudible, just because obviously when you're
17.
driving with the blues and sirens on, when you're trying to transmit it, the clarity of the set's probably not the best.
can I ask you to explain 7:27:39? You appear to say, yeah, that's received, thank you. What was that in relation to? And please feel free to look at the previous page. But I couldn't see anything on the previous page.
7:27 was the beginning of that conversation.
It says, yes, I'm a dog handler, I'm heading from Edinburgh. Is this guy fully restrained, or is there still requirements? So I'm asking, is there still requirement for myself to attend?
Oh, my version doesn't have that in it. So if you excuse me for the moment.
That's all right,
I must have something missing. Right, sorry, that was my issue. 7:27:27. You have that on your version, do you?
Yeah.
Right. I don't know why it's been missed out on mine. It says, yes, I'm a dog handler. I'm heading from Edinburgh. Is this guy fully restrained, or is there still a requirement?
Yeah.
What information were you seeking there?
If I was still required to attend the scene, because obviously saying is want to know, is the guy controlled? That's what I'm asking. If I'm still required, because I don't want to be driving blue lights if I don't need to. Because again, any time you're driving blue lights, I'm not saying it's inherently dangerous, but it's obviously more dangerous than driving at normal speed. So I'm just asking, is the guy under control?
Right. And then the response to that 7:27:34 from Sergeant Maxwell, we've got him under control now, thanks.
Yeah.
And then, so the 7:27:39 response from you was, yes, that's received, thank you.
Yeah.
And then, do you remember where you were when you were stood down?
Probably somewhere on the 92, I would think, or the 90 going on to the 92, something like that. I don't
So,
know.
in relation to the Forth Road Bridge, where were you?
I'd probably been on the Fife side of it. Yeah,
Over the bridge
Yeah.
on the Fife side, heading to Kirkcaldy.
I think so, but
And can we look at paragraph 63 of your inquiry statement, please? You've said, I have been asked what I did next after I was told the male was under control. I just kept going over. I just drove to Kirkcaldy anyway, just for support. Given the nature of the call and what was going on at on the radio, then it was obvious that it was becoming a bit more of a serious incident. A lot of times I get requested to then do further searches for things, because still at that stage I didn't really know if the knife was outstanding or if there was any other stuff that had happened.
yeah.
So you kept going.
Yeah.
Did you turn off your lights and siren?
Yeah, would have done, yeah.
And how long did it then take you to get to Kirkcaldy?
Again, not sure if I was how far I was kind of on the 92. It depends how close I was to.
Where
Kirkcaldy.
did you head first of all?
I can't even remember, to be honest. I just went into the kind of area, and then I was requested by I think it was maybe the CID or somebody to attend to, was it Hayfield Road, something like that?
That's where the incident took place,
yeah.
yes.
So I was asked to go to a certain property, which was believed to have been connected to it. So
Right.
just to that kind of area.
If we look at your statement again, I think on the next page, paragraph 70 and 71, you were asked about
Oh, it would have been that
A
other
c-
address then,
a
yeah.
call to Arran
Yeah.
Crescent.
So not Hayfield then, just the
Right.
Arran.
And you then went to Arran Crescent, we see that in paragraph 71, and you took your dog to Arran Crescent,
Yeah, I
not
just
Hayfield
drove
Road.
the car, yeah, just to the back.
Yeah, thank you. Can I ask you briefly about the... are you happy for me to continue given the time?
What's your sort of
I
prediction?
don't have very long at all now.
Perhaps you could finish this witness and then take a break.
Can I ask you briefly about paperwork that you have to fill in? If the dog comes off the lead
Yeah.
and you command the dog to approach, apprehend, bite the subject,
Yeah.
what paperwork do you have to do?
We have a use of force document we have to submit, which goes to the officer safety training instructors to assess, and we also complete an ION, an incident of note form, basically dictating what had happened. And from that, if the dog had bitten and engaged in that, we'd have a bite debrief, which is kind of like a bite report.
So we've heard that other officers, if they have to use force, they have to complete paperwork, and you are in the same position with your dog.
Yeah.
And can I ask you one or two questions about whether you've had any training in relation to diversity, equality, discrimination, that type of thing?
Yeah.
What sort of training have you had?
Remember the first week at college, we did the diversity training.
When
from
would that have been?
2008, when I first started, and there's diversity training on Moodle that we've kind of completed as part of kind of like stuff like unconscious bias and other items like that. So
Right.
just,
And how were you able to use that in terms of your work in the dog unit?
not really sure what you mean. Just the
Did you learn any skills or techniques that you were able to develop and evolve as your work with the dog unit continued?
I don't think anything specific to dogs would relate, but certainly as a police officer, yeah, I think diversity is obviously a massive part of your understanding of different groups, cultures, belief systems. That the more you can understand, the more you can empathise with people in situations.
Do your dogs, or any dog, deal with people differently depending on their ethnicity or their nationality?
Not that I'm aware of, no. Again, there may be science to disprove that, but I've certainly never been given any training in relation to how a dog would deal with different people.
You mentioned unconscious bias. Do you remember anything about the training you received on that?
No.
Were you given any techniques to guard against unconscious bias?
As part of the training we would have had, yeah, but I've also kind of researched stuff like that in my own free time as well. That it's important to our role that we're dealing with different people all the time. So.
And do you remember anything that you've learned?
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us about that?
Just that unconscious bias is a thing that exists, and we have to guard against it in situations where you may make decisions based on your preconceived stereotypes of things. So.
Is that something you're conscious in yourself? That
Yeah.
you have unconscious bias? And
I think everyone does in a sense. So to guard against it, you have to understand it, and I think I like to read things, I like to understand things as best I can. So to deny that fact is, I think, folly. It's you're not going to be able to understand people if you don't understand it.
do you yourself, are you able to identify any unconscious bias that you have?
Individually, maybe.
Okay. But I suppose I'm more interested in whether there is any recognition about an unconscious bias that you may have, which somehow is translated in how you use your dog and
No.
use that tool in your work.
No, I wouldn't like to think so, but again, you've got to guard against that all the time by keeping learning and keeping understanding things. And the more experience you have, the more knowledge you acquire, the more that you can guard against that. I mean, when we first came in, and it was not long after the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, the Macpherson report came out, so a lot of the stuff in the initial phases of the police training was to do with the Macpherson inquiry, to do with the stuff that happened in the Met at the time. So we were kind of very well cited that was a main trigger as to why we were doing all the training we were doing at police college, to try and understand that right from the start. So again, throughout my life, just the kind of person I am, I like to understand things. I've read a lot of books about those kind of inquiries, those kind of situations, so it helps me to be a better police officer, and that's just, I think it's an important thing to do. But yeah, have I as a person probably got inherent biases that I was given by my parents as a child? Probably, but have I tried to guard against them as best I can? Probably, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Could you give me a moment, please? One last thing, please, Constable Wood. You mentioned Glenrothes as being a satellite where a dog is, or dogs are based. That's closer to Kirkcaldy than Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Were you aware when you were deployed to Edinburgh and you went to attend to Kirkcaldy, why the Glenrothes dog wasn't?
I'm not sure if I knew that the person that was working at Glenrothes wasn't working that day until I'd asked that on the radio, maybe, I don't know, or if I knew in advance, I can't remember, I can't tell you, but certainly the handler in Glenrothes that day wasn't working, which is why I would cover, because I wouldn't normally cover from Edinburgh to go to Glenrothes unless there wasn't a handler over in that area.
And from your own experience, do you know how much quicker it is for someone to get from Glenrothes to Kirkcaldy than Edinburgh to Kirkcaldy?
Yeah, it'd be a matter of minutes to get from Glenrothes, just straight up the 92, yeah. So it would be quicker from Glenrothes to Kirkcaldy, definitely, yeah.
If they'd been available?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just following on from that, Constable Wood, you described the setup for specialist dogs in the East Command as being 20, and in any one shift there'd be 4, 2 in Edinburgh, 1 in Glenrothes and 1 in Larbert.
Yeah.
And can you help me further to understand, is that the case now and in 2015, or is there any difference?
I think it's probably the same. I couldn't give you exact, like 100%, but when Police Scotland, obviously, it was changed over to the one force, those structures were changed in a way where it obviously became Police Scotland, and those satellite areas, I don't think they've changed since then, and I don't think the numbers of dogs have particularly changed. I think the big change had happened from the transition of the legacy forces to the actual Police Scotland setup as it is. So I think if it's not exactly the same, it will be very, very close to the same numbers.
Thank you. Any Rule 9 applications? Mr. Dunlop. Constable Wood, could you just withdraw to the witness room for a moment? So
Okay.
I can,
Thank you.
yeah. Sorry, Dean of Faculty, I didn't give you your proper respect.
My Lord, the question of the time it would have taken for the dog unit to get from Edinburgh to Hayfield Road is maybe a matter of some importance, particularly given what we expect to come from Ms Caffrey, a witness to be adduced later. I would like to ask the witness a few clarifying questions regarding the contention that he could have been there within 10 to 15 minutes.
I don't think you put in a written application.
No, that is correct, my Lord. But it arises from the discussion that Millennium Friends just had with the witness 10 minutes ago, page 66 and page 67.
Yes. Very well, I shall allow you to do that.
Obliged.
Can we have the witness back? Is there a member of the staff available? Oh, yes, somebody's just gone in. Well, I thought somebody had gone in. Constable, Senior Counsel for certain of the attending officers is going to ask you about a certain matter.
Okay.
Officer, I wonder if I could just ask you a few questions about the time it might have taken to get to Hayfield Road on the day in question. The statement has redacted where you were starting from, just says Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Am I right in understanding it's based at Fetties?
Yeah.
So we're looking to get from Fetties Police Station to Hayfield Road in Kirkcaldy.
Yeah.
Now, Google Maps tells us that's travelling on the road, that's 26.7 miles. Okay? When you're getting from Fetties there, you're going to have to go over the Forth Road Bridge.
Yeah.
The first part of that journey involves going through built-up areas, yes?
Okay.
So and I just want to be clear, am I right in understanding that in that time you're not going to be travelling, some of that's 20, some of it's 30 miles an hour, you're not going to be travelling at 80 miles an hour
No, it's
going through those?
20 miles an hour above the speed limit, yeah.
Okay. So for the first part of that journey, you're going to be, you're not bound by the speed limit, but you're not going to be going at 80 miles an hour.
No.
Okay?
You just said you're allowed to go 20
20 miles an hour
plus
above the speed limit, yeah.
over the limit.
Yeah. So for if it's a 20 mile an hour, you'll be going up to 40. If it's a 30, you'll be going up to 50.
I don't think the 20 mile an hour existed in Edinburgh at that time. It was probably still the 30, but yeah,
Okay.
yeah, 50 and a 30, and
Okay.
yeah.
If it's right to say it's 26.7 miles, to get there in 10 minutes would require you to hold a speed of 160 miles an hour.
Okay.
So it can't be 10, is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair, yeah. 100%.
To get there in 15 minutes would require you to hold a speed of 107 miles an hour for
Okay.
the whole distance. And again, I assume we're agreed that's not correct.
Yeah.
20 miles an hour requires you to hold a speed of 80 miles an hour from the start to the end. Again, does that seem perhaps a bit unlikely?
Sorry, you say 20 miles an hour?
Sorry, 20 minutes. 20
Oh.
minutes
Okay,
requires you to hold a speed for the whole
80.
duration at 80 miles an hour.
okay. We'll say 20 then, that's fair, yeah.
So is it at least 20?
Well, again, without scientifically going out and proving how long it would take me to drive,
Yeah.
that comment at the timings was based on a conversation via Teams with a solicitor, and again, I gave an off-the-cuff timings for it.
Please don't misunderstand.
It could very easily be 20. It's,
Yeah. Please don't misunderstand. I've got no criticism. I just want to be clear
yeah, no,
as to
no,
how accurate
absolutely,
this
yeah.
could be.
No, if you tell me that's the numbers, then yeah, fair enough.
So and if for the first part of that you're effectively capped to 50 miles an hour, and even allowing that you might be able to catch up some thereafter by going at 90,
Yeah.
does that mean at the very, very quickest you could do in there is 20 minutes, and it's probably a bit more than that?
I suppose that would be fair enough. 'Cause
Yeah.
It sounds more scientific than my approach to. Yeah.
Thank you, officer. I'll oblige.
Thank you very much for coming to give evidence, Constable Wood. When we rise, you will be free to go.
Okay. Thank you.
20-minute break. Good afternoon, Mr. Graves.
Afternoon, sir.
Would you say the words of the affirmation after me, please? I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Ms. Graham.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Graves.
Afternoon.
You are Martin Graves.
Yes,
What age are you?
I'm nearly 60, 59.
And you were formerly with the Metropolitan Police Service from 1982 until your retirement in September 2012.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. And you've been retired for 10 years?
Yes, nearly, or just over.
And when you retired, you'd held the rank of sergeant from January 1997. So for the last 15 years of your service, you were a sergeant.
I was, yes. I'd also acted as inspector during that time as well.
Right. So did you end as an acting inspector?
No, I went back. I was a sergeant when I retired. I had done acting inspector in the interim period, yes.
Right, thank you. You will see in front of you that you have some papers. You have a folder and some loose papers. And I just want to let you know, please feel free to use any of the papers in front of you. You've given an inquiry statement to us, and there's a hard copy of that in front of you.
Yes, thank you.
And other documents that we'll come to in a moment.
Yes.
When I'm going through those, they'll come up on the screen in front of you as well. But that might just be one paragraph or one section. If you feel there's some other important issues that are out with the screen, please let me know, and we'll have those brought up on the screen
I will,
as
yes.
well. Could I ask you to look first of all at your inquiry statement, SBPI 00190. And you'll see on page 1, it was taken over the course of 2 days, the 12th and 13th of October this
That's
year.
correct, yes.
And if we can look at the final page, you should see that it was signed on the
16th of November.
Yes, I have that as well. I don't see it on the screen, but your signature is redacted
Yes.
on the screen. But can you confirm to us that on the hard copy you've signed every page?
Yes, every page on the last page is all signed by myself.
Thank you. The final paragraph, which is 1, 2, 3, it reads, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website.
Yes, I am aware of that,
And
yes.
that was your understanding when you signed?
It was, yes.
Thank you. You will also see in front of you an A3 sized spreadsheet, which we're calling the combined audio and visual timeline.
Yes.
Am I correct in saying you've had a chance to look at that previously?
Yes, I've had access to that document previously, yes.
Thank you. We may come to that. When we do, I'll tell you which page I'm interested in. And then we've also got access to an evidence video timeline, which is SBPI 00046. And if we just pause it, can I just confirm you've had access to this?
From the original investigation, yes, I was given the footage that was available at the time. I believe there's further footage has come to light, which I've not seen.
This has been combined into one document. Where if we need to look at it, we'll do so, and I'll explain that on the screen for you.
Yes.
Now, at one point, you were contacted or instructed by the Crown Office. So if we could go back to your inquiry statement, paragraph 9. Do we see that you've explained here that you were instructed by the Crown Office to produce a report on the use of force by the police in relation to the restraint of Mr. Sheku Bayo?
Back in 2018, yes.
And that was dated the 13th of April 2018?
That is correct, yes.
So it was 3 years after the events, but it was 4 years ago now?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. And in addition to your involvement with the inquiry, you've been also given access to some of the inquiry evidence.
That's correct, yes.
people are aware that this is all being live streamed, and we have recordings of evidence available on our website.
Yes, I was specifically asked to view certain footage from the inquiry, yes.
You'll be aware that in 2018 no evidence had been taken, but we now have the privilege of having been able to do that.
Yes, at the time I didn't have any of that information.
Right. But you've had a chance to look at some of that.
I have, yes.
Thank you. Let's just look briefly at your report, which is COPFS 00024. And you see that this was instructed by Mr. Alistair MacLeod, Senior Procurator Fiscal Depute at Crown Office Serious and Organised Crime Unit in Edinburgh.
That's correct, yes.
And if we can just go down to pages 3 and 4, do we see that as part of your report to Crown Office, you provided a summary or a brief CV?
Yes, as it was dated in 2018, yes.
So it was up to date in 2018.
Yes, that's correct.
And if we could just briefly, if I could just briefly take one or two matters from you in relation to this, so everyone can tell what your experience is. I think you say in your summary here that in April 2011, you went to New Scotland Yard as a senior advisor and subject matter expert in relation to personal safety.
That's correct.
Sorry, if we go up the screen, sorry.
Yeah, that's correct. I've been involved with its practical delivery since 1995. I became the lead sergeant for the Central Officer Safety Unit in April 2000, and then due to restructuring within the Metropolitan Police in 2011, I then moved to Scotland Yard as the senior advisor on officer safety.
And how many officers were you, in terms of delivering officer safety training, how many officers did you work with?
In delivery, we were responsible for all the new recruits and staff joining the Metropolitan Police on a yearly basis,
Right.
and a cascade trainer pool of nearly 500 trainers. And I personally managed a team of 16 staff.
Right. And were you part of that group of 500 trainers, or were you the manager in charge?
I was the manager in charge of the lead team of 12 to 16 staff. The cascade trainers were out on station, and they were responsible for delivering the refresher training at a local level.
And was that the 500?
That's the 500, yes.
And how many recruits or new officers were you training, say, in the course of a year?
In excess of 5,000.
So every year, 5,000. Thank you. And you said that this role included the creation of a curriculum, a review and development of service training packages, policy and equipment.
That's correct, yes.
So it didn't remain static during that time?
It was a continual development process on a 6-monthly rolling basis, yes.
How long were you in that particular role?
Just over 10 years, nearly 10 and a half years.
You've also indicated in this CV that you provided advice to professional standards, legal services and other departments within the Met.
Yes.
And would that be writing opinions, or how would you provide that advice?
It would be reviewing case studies, reviewing CCTV footage, providing professional standards with opinion on use of force, dealing with, as a representative of the Metropolitan Police, external bodies such as Inquest and various Home Office panels.
And during that time, did you also have to keep up with your own personal training?
Yeah, I was actively involved in the delivery of the training and obviously the development of those skills, so we had to keep our skills up to level.
So you remained a police officer?
Yes, I was still operationally deployed, mainly at the weekends, and trained during the Monday to Friday.
Thank you. As part of this role, you say you liaised with outside agencies, and you've mentioned a number of them already. You mentioned the agency Inquest. Could you tell us a little about your involvement with them?
We were regularly involved with a number of external organisations that were looking at police use of force, and specifically deaths in police contact. With the continual review of the training and the national curriculum and the national manual, it was part of my role as the secretary for the advisory committee to then ACPO, now National Police Chiefs Council, to be the liaison between these outside groups and senior management within the police service.
So you were representing the police force on those advisory boards, or engaging with those boards?
Yes, representing and also providing required support for those groups that were multi-agency on a number of occasions.
Thank you. Now, as part of your, this is F, you said in this CV you still retained your qualification as a personal safety trainer, and as I understand, having read your up-to-date statement, I think that remains the position today. Is that
yes,
right?
I still deliver some training on behalf of the College of Policing, and I also deliver training externally to police forces, police services, and also immigration and border force officers.
Right. Can you tell us about your involvement with the College of Police?
When I retired in 2012, I became an associate lecturer with the College of Policing, again assisting with the development of training packages and development processes around personal safety. I delivered various packages on their behalf, both here in the UK and also abroad, to police forces such as Sierra Leone, Saudi Arabia, Ghana, and various other places.
I'll come back to that actually. In relation to your position as associate lecturer, is that building on the experience and the work you did with the Met in your role as head of the training?
Yes, obviously, as I said, I was secretary to the committee for over 10 years, and that gave me an overview nationally. I regularly attended other police services around the country, including Scotland, Northern Ireland, etc., to look at their training, to provide advice and guidance, and to act as a conduit to try and pull all of this, the different learning that was happening around the country into one place.
Brilliant. Can I just ask, is that an honorary position as associate lecturer?
No, you have to go through a selection process.
So is it a paid employed position?
Yes.
With the College of Policing?
With the College of Policing, yes.
So although you've retired from the police force, you're now an employee of the College of Policing?
That's correct, yes.
How often do you work with them?
I haven't worked with them for over 2 years now, purely because of other work commitments, not being able to release the time. But I worked extensively with them for over 5 or 6, nearly 6 years.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned that as part of your role you would go around the country, and you mentioned Scotland. Can you tell us what experience you had of Scotland and when you would do that?
Yes, I've attended the training school on at least 3 separate occasions for meetings.
Is that Tullyallen?
Yes, up at Tullyallen. I've also I've been to Edinburgh, I've been to Glasgow when regional meetings were being held, and I was asked to come and sit in to comment on particular areas of development that different forces or different services were looking at. In relation, I've also been to Scotland on 2 occasions where we've had multi-agency seminars with the prison service, the police and mental health institutions, where we've been looking at combined restraint techniques and looking at best practice.
And would members of the police service in Scotland be at those meetings?
They would, yes.
And discussing the training that they were considering implementing or
yes,
doing
they
at
would,
the time?
Yes, Police Scotland, when it was formed, they actually had a representative who sat on the main committee with us.
And did you, as part of any of those meetings, say at Tullyallen, did you see demonstrations of training carried out in
Yes,
Scotland?
not just demonstrations, but we also took part in actual workshops where we we sort of joined in together and looked at different physical tactics and different things that we were all looking at.
And during those meetings, would you share best practice information, that type of thing?
Yes, we would. And there was also a process that I introduced whereby other services, other police forces could introduce tactics or amendments to the manual with relevant paperwork, etc., which could then be considered by the committee for inclusion in the following year's amendments.
And that committee, could it adopt some of those recommendations and then roll them out?
Yes, it was. We were responsible for the ongoing management of both the curriculum within England and Wales, and obviously Scotland were happy to sort of come along with that work, and also the yearly update of the manual.
Mm-hmm. And when were these meetings and sharing sessions taking place?
Across the board, we had a quarterly meeting every 3 months. That was shared around the country, so we went to different places to sort of support the different services. From memory, I can remember at least 4 visits to Scotland over that sort of 10-year period.
When
so
you were
least,
in this role?
Yeah, so at least once a year.
Once a year. Thank you. Can we also just draw the Chair's attention to some of the other information that you provided in your inquiry statement? And I think that's available from paragraphs 2 of your inquiry statement up to paragraph 8. So all of these detail your experience over the years and different work that you have carried out. Is that correct? The Chair will have this inquiry statement available to him to consider in detail. Now, in addition to your original report and your inquiry statement, I think you've also kindly provided us with a CV. And can I ask us to look briefly at COPFS 00007, please? And it's headed Appendix A, but it is a curriculum vitae, and that is up to date at the moment, is it?
Yes, it should be, yes.
Thank you. And can I look first of all at page 1, paragraph 6? And I think you mentioned this a moment ago. You say that earlier this year, is that 2022?
Yes.
You designed and delivered an 8-week personal safety training programme to police officers in Sierra Leone.
That's correct, yes.
Can you explain a little more about the work you did?
It was basically initially a training event for police officers in Sierra Leone. Then from that training of just over 250 officers, we selected a group of 20 officers who had the relevant level of expertise, and then trained them on to be able to deliver cascade training going forward. It's basically a train-the-trainer event. And in total, we were there for just over 7 weeks.
And can you explain to those listening a little bit about this word you've used, the cascade training? Can you tell us about that?
Yes, obviously, if we were going out all the time and delivering the training, we would be there on a constant basis. And certainly within the UK, the model is around repeated refresher training for officers, although very minimal. It's 12, they're dedicated at 12 hours a year. Officers to deliver that normally come from local draw, whereby they're trained up to deliver a package of refresher training every 6 months or once a year, and that's normally delivered by a central team, sometimes from the training school, sometimes from another location, sometimes under the public order wing, and they look after the cascade trainers, and the cascade trainers deliver to the local officers and the local staff.
Thank you. You mentioned a 12-hour training regime. I may be mistaken in this. I thought in Scotland it was 1 day a year. But
it's 1 day a year in Scotland. The UK recommendation is 12 hours per year.
Right, thank you. Can we look at paragraph 9, please, on page 1? And you talk about having a certificate for verbal judo. I'm quite interested in an explanation on that.
It's a very old form of tactical communication that was introduced probably 15 years ago, but looks at different ways of being able to engage people and use communication skills to glean a result or lead a person in a particular direction. It's sometimes now referred to as sort of persuasive communication skills, for want of a better terminology. It's about using different words and different phrases in different ways to glean a result from a person that they might not want to actually go down that particular road.
And you did that 15 years ago?
Yes.
Right. We've heard mention of things like de-escalation, tactical communications, and they may mean slightly different things, but the use of words and body language to communicate with people, is that the type of thing that is covered by verbal judo?
It is, yes. Yes, and it's something that it was brought in. A lot of what appeared in the original training for verbal judo was incorporated into the manual, into the communication section of the manual.
Right. Could we look at the top of page 2, please? That'll be fine, thank you. And there is mention of, it's at the bottom of page 1 and then on to page 2. Let me just read that. At a national level, I was appointed secretary to the Association of Chief Police Officers Practitioners Advisory Group on Personal Safety in April 2000. This is part of the Self-Defence, Arrest and Restraint Subcommittee under the Firearms and Conflict Management portfolio. This role included the management of the National Personal Safety Manual, which I fully reviewed and continually updated, with the latest version having been launched in February 2012. So is this the equivalent of the Scottish OST manual?
It's a far larger document. It's in excess of 4,500 pages.
All right.
Covers just about everything that we come across, including personal safety skills for firearms officers, mounted officers, etc. And it's as part of the review, we conducted a very large independent medical review of all of the tactics that went into the manual. And that panel, which was independent, was funded by the Home Office.
And this covers not just the police services, all emergency services?
It's a police document. It's run by the police service. I said it was owned and instructed by ACPO as it was then, now the MPCC. But there are other organisations that take some of its content on board. I'm aware that Police Scotland have taken an awful lot of what is in that manual across to their training here. And as I said, the prison service have some of it in their manual. Certainly some of the medical review information has been incorporated into their manuals.
Right. And the latest version of that is dated February 2012?
The latest, when I say version, the latest sort of incarnation of it, how it looks now, is from the review that I did in 2012, just before I retired. It is updated on a regular basis, but the actual format is from February 2012 onwards.
Was that the sort of foundation document?
Yeah, that was the large document, and then every year or every 2 years there's a review, and as I said, there's this process for additional tactics or training to be added to it, or amendments to be made to what's already in there.
Is this the document that new recruits would be given when they are arriving in the service?
Within England and Wales, they're given access to it online because it's such a large document via the what was NCOL, but by the College of Policing, basically. But most services or forces also then take from that manual what they require for the training of their particular staff, and will mostly produce an additional manual, a hard copy manual for their staff.
I see. And for officers who maybe became police officers before February 2012, are they given access to this as well?
Yes, they would have been, but they would have been trained from the previous manual, and the previous manual's been in existence since 2004.
Was that the first manual?
That was the first formulated manual at a national level, yes.
Thank you. And then can we look at paragraph 3 of page 2, please? And this is about 2008. And you say that you designed a national learning programme curriculum.
Yes, in 2007 there was Her Majesty's Inspectors of Constabularies did a review of personal safety and made a number of recommendations. And on the back of those recommendations, ACPO put together a working party for which I sat on to review the national curriculum, review the trainers programme, and also review the manual.
Thank you. And then paragraph 4, you talk about doing a research project on behalf of the Federation, Police Federation.
Yes, I've done a number of research programmes over the years, not just for the Federation, but also on behalf of ACPO.
So are the Police Federation seen as one of the outside bodies or third parties? Or are they seen as being part of, a closer part of the police?
They're an outside body. They're the representatives for police officers, rank and file, and senior officers across the service. But they, part of their role is to improve the safety of their members, of officers, and they will regularly fund and support programmes that may improve that.
Thank you. And then if we can look at the bottom of page 2. Do we also see that you've received a number of commendations and awards during
Yes.
your time as a police officer?
Yes, I mean the top one on there, my ACPO President's commendation, was for my 11 plus years work on the development and improvement of officer safety across the whole of the service.
And it says, Commander's commendation for bravery in talking something with a large knife and wearing an improvised explosive device.
Yes.
So it sounds like that was a situation where did you use your judo on that occasion?
I tried it. It ended up in a scuffle whereby he went to detonate the improvised explosive device that he was wearing on his body. He basically provided a bomb and he had it in his chest, and he went to detonate the bomb, and we had to tackle him. So we took him to the ground and disarmed him.
Right. And could we look now, move away from that for a moment and go back to your inquiry statement, please? And you've said in paragraph 3 that you were in a unit based in Hendon. Was this at the time you were doing the job for at New Scotland Yard?
I basically had 3 hats. I had the training role at Hendon at Police College. I had the role at Scotland Yard, so I split my time between the 2 positions, and I also had my national role as well, secretary in the committee.
Very, very busy man, obviously, at this time. And you were asked at paragraph 6 of your inquiry statement if you'd ever trained as an initial tactical firearms commander. We've heard this expression, sometimes abbreviated to ITFC, and I think you said that wasn't something that you'd done.
No, I was a firearms officer for a number of years. I had to surrender that qualification when I moved over and became a sergeant. So I've trained with firearms officers. I've actually delivered personal safety training to firearms officers. So at the time of when I was still serving, I was aware of the guidance and the deployment guidelines for armed officers. But as I've never been trained or acted as an ITFC.
When did you train with firearms officers?
I was training right up to 2012 with firearms. I was an authorised firearms officer up until about a year after I became a sergeant, so 97, 98.
I think you said you became a sergeant in 97.
Yeah, that'll be about right. About 98, I would probably have had
98.
to surrender my authorisation.
Right. And so after that date, did you stop training with firearms officers?
Yes, I did.
And then you've also said that you carried out some training for firearms officers?
My department was responsible for training alongside firearms trainers, new officers to the role, and in particular close protection and residential protection officers who were taking on those roles within the MPS.
And when were you doing that?
I was doing that right the way up to 2010.
Were you aware at that time in terms of the firearms training? Were there distinctions between Scotland and England and the way training was delivered?
There were distinctions, specifically and further distinctions between the Met Police and how a lot of other services deploy their armed officers, yes.
Thank you. And looking again at paragraph 6, you say you're also a trained tactical advisor and a PIM manager, post-incident management.
Post-incident manager, yes.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that experience?
I, on a number of occasions when I was still, before I went to the officer safety unit, I would be called in to supervise and manage critical incidents, serious road traffic accidents, etc., or possible deaths in police contact.
Right. And when was that?
That was right up until 2000, but then I continued my work past then, and I started to do major incident debriefing as part of the officer safety unit for major public order events. So major public disorder and things like that, I would be involved more in that side of it rather than the death in police contact.
And when you say more involved, what do you mean by that?
I would be called in sometimes as a subsequent debriefer for post-incident debriefs after the initial PIM process has been put in place. So I'd be brought in maybe 2-3 days, maybe even a week or two after the incident to offer advice and guidance and to debrief officers in relation to the incident to try and prevent post-traumatic stress building within the units.
Can you help me understand when you last acted as a PIM manager?
Last one would have been 2011, just after the disorder in London.
Right. And then after that, you would be occasionally brought in a couple of weeks after the incident to deal with other matters?
Yeah, I mean, 2011, I was actually deployed throughout that whole sort of week of disorder within the MPS, and I think it was about 3 to 4 weeks after that I was asked to sit in on a couple of debriefs and offer support to some of the units that had been on the ground working at the time.
And can you tell me a little bit more about the disorder that you're describing?
It was the major disorder that basically followed a shooting in London. It started with the Tottenham disorder and then spread rapidly throughout London to many seats. One of the first and only times I've seen so many officers from other forces being deployed on the streets of London.
Right. And you came in after that to assist?
Yeah, having worked the 5 or 6 days solid that the disorder went on for, it was about 3 or 4 weeks afterwards I was brought into, I think, three separate briefings that were set up and asked to assist with the debriefing of officers who had been involved.
Thank you. You've also said that you delivered training in relation to risk assessment, this is again in paragraph 6, and managing restraints within the custody arena on the initial custody course within the Met. Could you tell us a little about that role?
Yes, when they did a review, I think it was about 2003, of the custody officers training within the MPS, they looked at bringing in something that would assist them in dealing with and understanding the protocols around dealing with violent or potentially violent individuals coming into custody, we had just at that time, we were reviewing the restraint processes around restraint of individuals. So it was about giving them an input, giving new sergeants, new custody officers an input on how to manage that environment, how, you know, that they're in charge of that domain, and that they've got to manage those environments to the best of their capability. And also I used to look at the assessment of detainees and looking at the risks, you know, what to look out for, different things to look out for risk markers for detainees in response to self-harming and those sorts of areas.
Just out of interest, if someone is brought to a custody suite and they've been struck to the head, is it part of the training for custody officers that that person should be medically assessed?
Oh, definitely, yes.
Our understanding and evidence we've heard is that any head injury the person should be assessed medically.
Yes, that's correct.
And then at the final sentence there, you say, additionally, I have worked in an area control room in Scotland Yard on the 999 system.
Yes.
And I'd like to hear more about that, please.
I used to work additional shifts as both a receiver and dispatcher within the Scotland Yard 999 system. So that's taking in what you would class as a grade 1 or category 1 I-call, as we would call them, communicating with the informants, deploying and assigning units, setting up containment, setting up cordons, managing RVPs, rendezvous points if it's necessary, and escalating any calls that needed to be looked at by the supervisors, possibly the chief inspector or inspector within the control room.
We've heard some evidence about a control room in Scotland and the structure there, and we've heard about call takers, controllers, sergeants, and then people in the overview room, which contains an overview sergeant, an inspector who's also a trained ITFC officer. From that description, brief as it is, are you able to compare the job you did in the ACR in Scotland Yard with any of those jobs that we've heard about?
I would have been both a call receiver or taking the calls in, but also a dispatcher, and I also acted on the sergeant's role, whereby you would be supervising a bank of dispatchers in relation. Remembering that information room takes in calls for the whole of London, so you could be deploying to any of the 32 boroughs within London from information room. So it's a very large central at that level. But you've then got what now we have area control rooms as well, which would be responsible for 2 or 3 boroughs each.
Right. I'd like to try and tease out whether there are any similarities between the system that you worked in and the system here. It sounds like your particular role would have covered the call taker, the controller, and on occasions the sergeant area.
Yes, as I said, certainly, night shifts over the weekends and things like that, when the resources are reduced. I would sometimes go in and be the sergeant sort of controller in relation to a number of desks or a number of positions. So I would supervise to make sure that calls are looking at the calls coming in, anything that was being directed to me for my attention, reviewing that, carrying out an assessment of the risk involved in that particular call, ensuring that the relevant resources have been assigned, or if they're not assigned, making sure that they're contacted or assigned as soon as they're available, and also monitoring that particular incident at a distance to make sure that it's being dealt with locally, and as and when it's either escalated or it needs to be supported from other resources, that those resources are made available.
So you continue to monitor calls which you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And is this information that's coming up on a screen?
Yes.
And at the same time, do you have a headset where you can hear Airwaves transmissions?
Yes,
from
you're listening to all the
officers?
radios. You've actually got two channels to think about in London. You've got the personal radio network for the actual area that it's being used on, but there's also a separate radio channel which connects all of the main vehicles, and that's how we would normally deploy vehicles, and then revert over to the personal radios once they're on scene and they're out of the vehicles. So you're actually monitoring two systems basically,
And the screen.
and the screen.
And we've heard about in Scotland that in addition to the work that's going on with the controller, that there will be other people supporting around the scenes, maybe contacting the ambulance service, contacting specialist resources. Is that similar to?
Yes, you'd be using your dispatchers, or you'd be using your call takers to be able to say, right, refer that to, because in London they're linked automatically to the fire service, to the ambulance service, etc. But some of the other services, you've usually got to contact them directly, so you dedicate somebody to say, right, I want that done.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now to a different paragraph.
Point of start. Well, we'll stop for lunch and sit at 2 o'clock.